When you're choosing dive computers, one of the big features that you should be looking at over a lot of other things is which decompression algorithm the machine uses. And in this video, I'm going to explain what the algorithm is, how they work, and run through some of the most common algorithms you'll find today. Hi, all of you awesome scuba divers out there. Welcome to the Scuba Diver Magazine channel, your favorite place for the latest scuba diving news and gear reviews. And yes, you'll see some divers online on forums kind of rate computers. Oh, I wouldn't use that one, it's conservative due to their algorithm. And of course, nobody wants to end a dive whilst they still have a ton of gas and their buddy's dive computer still has 10 minutes of NDL, so the algorithm is important. A decompression algorithm in a scuba diving computer is the set of mathematical rules that the device uses to estimate how much inert gas, primarily nitrogen or nitrogen and helium, your body is absorbing and releasing during the dive. The computer continuously combines measured depth and time using sensors plus your selected gas mix and conservatism settings to model tissue compartments. You'll see that a lot, which are basically different types of body tissue, like muscle, blood or fat and bone, different types of like body materials, so that when you see something like a 16 compartment algorithm, it's working with 16 different types of body tissue. Some that absorb fast and expel dissolved gases just as quickly, and some that are slow to absorb and expel. From that model, it predicts how close each compartment is to a calculated limit for safe ascent. Basically, how much gas you've absorbed into each of your like body organs and things, and if you were to ascend, how quickly that would all be released safely as you exhale it, or unsafely where it can form bubbles. Imagine like 16 water bottles. At one end, the bottle fills up very quickly, but there's quite a large hole at the bottom, so when you stop pouring water into it, it drains out very quickly. We call something like that a fast tissue, something like blood. It absorbs very quickly, but it gets rid of it very quickly at the same time. At the other end, we have a bottle that takes forever to fill up and has a rather small hole at the bottom, which is fine for like 1 or 2 dives because it won't fill up very much. But over multiple dives where it just keeps trickle feeding and filling up, but doesn't really completely like get rid of everything, you need to spend some time out of the water as a surface interval so it can drain fully, and that's what we call a slow tissue, something like bone. It takes a long time for bone to absorb that extra gas, and it takes a long time to get rid of it. If any of those water bottles overfill, you risk decompression illness. It's not a perfect analogy, but hopefully it helps the more like visual learners. The algorithm monitors all of that, and it predicts when a direct ascent, if at this point you were to ascend straight up to the surface at a safe rate, would that exceed the limit. And the time until that point is your NDL, your no decompression limit. So when you exceed that, you exceed your NDL returns to 0. You can't ascend straight up to the surface. The computer then switches to a decompression mode and then calculates required stops at certain depths and times where you have to stay at that depth to keep modeled gas levels below the limits. Different algorithms can produce different NDLs and stop schedules on the same dive because they make different assumptions about acceptable supersaturation, ascent behavior, and repetitive diving. Importantly, the algorithm is a decision aid. It doesn't measure bubbles or individual physiology, but it provides a real-time model-based idea of roughly how much gas is dissolved in your body at all times. That's why it's crucial that you set up your computer correctly with the right gas mix and everything on the conservatism settings so that it can give you the most accurate predictions, because the dive computer is just strapped to your wrist or attached onto a console or something. It doesn't know what's going on in each particular diver's bodies, it's basically just running off a script, an algorithm, and it can only be as accurate as the information that you put into it. One of the most common algorithms you'll see today is a Bühlmann, and it's often the Bühlmann ZHL16C. Developed by Swiss physician Dr. Albert A. Bühlmann back in the 80s, ZH in the name stands for Zurich, the city where Dr. Albert Bühlmann works, and L stands for limits. And then the number behind it is how many compartments that it calculates. After that, you may see some letters such as like PMG for predictive multi-gas, or GF is a very common one for gradient factors. Those are special adaptations to the algorithm, either from the manufacturer or settings that you can change to customize how your conservatism settings are set on your computer. What makes it unique is its transparency and tunability. It relies on published parameters and explicit maximums, known as M values, for each modeled tissue, where manufacturers and divers, via settings like gradient factors, can adjust in a predictable way. Bühlmann represents the body as a set of hypothetical tissue compartments that we spoke about earlier, each with a half time that determines how quickly it absorbs and releases inert gas. As the computer samples depth and time throughout the dive, it converts depth into ambient pressure and updates every compartment. If any compartment exceeds its limit during the ascent, the model predicts an ascent ceiling that you must remain deeper than until off-gassing lowers the pressure in the leading compartment. A dive computer uses the most limiting compartments to compute NDLs, ceilings, and stop times. With gradient factors, it scales the limits to add conservatism, yielding shorter NDLs and longer decompression when desired. They really let you kind of fine-tune how your dive profile progresses. RGBM is another popular algorithm in modern dive computers, and it's a reduced gradient bubble model. RGBM treats decompression as a dual phase process. It models both dissolved inert gas in tissues and the formation and growth of free phase microbubbles during ascent. Developed by physicist Bruce 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐿𝐵𝐿𝐵, RGBM is grounded in bubble nucleation concepts, basically bubble formation, and a critical phase volume framework. So its limits are framed around restricting permissible bubble excesses and the pressure gradients that drive bubble expansion, not only dissolved gas loading. We want gases to stay dissolved in our tissues and of course avoid bubble formation from ascending too quickly, and that's a function of RGBM. Operationally, an RGBM computer still uses multiple tissue compartments, fast to slow, to estimate on-gassing and off-gassing, but it will reduce gradients by tightening allowable supersaturation when the profile or dive series suggests higher bubble stress. Examples commonly addressed include rapid ascents, very short surface intervals, multi-day activity, and deeper than previous or like sawtooth dive patterns. Many implementations express this by reducing compartment limits or lowering effective M values, which can shorten NDLs, add mandatory safety stops, lengthen decompression, or recommend longer surface intervals after certain profiles, which often gives RGBM a more conservative reputation. Finally, similar to ZHL, RGBM is a family label. Manufacturers implement like tuned variations of it. For example, you've got Suunto's, they've got Suunto RGBM, they've got technical RGBM and fused RGBM generations. So two RGBM branded computers can legitimately produce different NDLs and stop schedules depending on specific versions and settings. So just because one is an RGBM, just double check which RGBM. Pelagic Z Plus or DSAT you may see on some pelagic computers, so think oceanic and aqualung dive computers. Z Plus is based on the Bühlmann, but made to be a touch more conservative. DSAT was designed by PADI for the Recreational Dive Planner, the RDP. It's generally more liberal, allowing longer bottom times on like warm water, minimal effort dives, just chilled out like holiday diving. Pelagic Z Plus is presented as the conservative recreational choice, and also as suitable for repetitive diving, especially deep and decompression diving. Oceanic itself states that Z Plus uses the Bühlmann 𝐬𝐻L16C database, and that on standard recreational dives, it increases the computer's conservative factor by roughly 15 to 20%. It is described as targeted at the demands of repetitive cold water decompression diving at altitude as well, whilst maximizing dive time and depth without penalties. Pelagic DSAT is presented as the liberal recreational choice. Oceanic says it safely maximizes dive time for repetitive multi-level recreational diving, and that it's based on the human Doppler studies used to develop PADI's RDP. You can sometimes find DSAT and Z Plus as dual algorithms on a single computer. So you can basically pick or choose either a more liberal or a more conservative set of limits, depending on the dive ahead of you. If you dive at home in very cold waters, but you do dive abroad, somewhere sunny quite frequently, that could be a nice alternative for you, as opposed to having to reset all the different like gradient factors or something. You just switch from DSAT to Z Plus. The simple answer is the one that is safest and, of course, installed on the computer that has the features that you need. There's no universally best decompression algorithm on a dive computer, because you're not choosing like a single dive. Every dive is slightly different. You're choosing, one, a mathematical model, two, a manufacturer's implementation of that particular model, and three, your own settings that you install into it, the conservatism, the altitude and gas mixes. Those choices materially change NDLs and decompression guidance, even on the same profile. So you can get two different algorithms to have fairly similar settings. It just takes a lot of fiddling on both computers. If you want one default that is hard to regret, a wider used answer is a well-documented Bühlmann ZHL implementation with adjustable conservatism, often via gradient factors. The practical advantage is transparency and control. The model's M values are explicit, and gradient factors are a clear way to run the algorithm further away. A lot of divers have their preferred gradient factors and why from published limits. It's all written down and it's all very available. RGBM family algorithms can be a good choice if you prefer a computer that's designed to be more bubble aware in its decision making, often tightening limits after profiles associated with higher bubble stress, for example, like repetitive dives, as I mentioned, or sawtooth dive patterns. The key caveat is that RGBM is that family label. The same with Bühlmann. Implementations vary by brand and generation. So whilst two different dive computers can have RGBM or ZHL, unless the settings are exactly the same, they can have different results. DSAT versus Pelagic Z Plus is a clear example of like best depends on what context. DSAT is typically the more liberal option for recreational multi-level repetitive diving, whilst Z Plus is explicitly positioned as more conservative and is based on that Bühlmann ZHL16C. In practice, the best algorithm is just the one that you can use consistently. Understand well enough to set conservatism appropriately and match with your buddy or team so that the most conservative computer doesn't consistently force the plan. So when you are looking at dive computers, check which algorithm it actually has installed. It should be written somewhere, especially on the manufacturer's webpage, and double check that it actually suits your type of diving. In a lot of cases, for holiday diving, you won't notice much of a difference between different algorithms unless you do change the settings into some wild extremes. Before you go changing too many settings like gradient factors, do make sure that you do read up on what each setting actually does, so you don't blindly follow what your dive computer tells you, because there are some settings where if you're not paying attention, you can make your dive computer quite dangerous if you don't know what you're fiddling with. And before each dive, just spend a minute to double check each settings in your dive computer, because a simple typo, especially if you're not paying attention, you're just installing your nitrox mix or something, and it looks like a 1, but actually it's a 7. A simple typo can really have some huge effects on your dive profile and your safety. Don't miss out on the UK's Go Diving Show 2026. Join thousands of divers at NAEC Stoneleigh Park in Coventry in the UK on the 28th of February and the 1st of March for 2 action-packed days of world-class speakers, hands-on experiences and hundreds of exhibitors showcasing the latest kit, resorts, liveaboards and dream destinations. It's the UK's largest consumer dive show with a huge show floor and plenty to explore, whether you're brand new to the diving scene or you're seriously experienced. Tickets are now on sale on our website by clicking on this link up here in the corner of the screen. Lock yours in today and make this the weekend you plan your next big dive by clicking on this link up in the corner of the screen. Thank you for watching, everybody, and of course, safe diving.